Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel on the show. Welcome to a Monday edition. It's the final third of a week, 2/3 of a week of fall camp. Oregon had their second and final fall scrimmage this past weekend. They have 3 days of fall camp before they kick us out, and they start, to Dan Lanning's words, start gearing towards implementing game plans and preparing and scouting and getting themselves ready for the season opener on August 31st against Idaho. So perfect time to open up the mailbag. We've got some good questions. We've got some storylines that have emerged from fall camp that we'll need to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to start right there. And I thought we had numerous questions on this topic, as you'd expect. And we haven't discussed this on the podcast because this stuff kind of broke late last week and over the weekend. But a question from @541Ducks. Who do you see replacing Matthew Bedford, and how much of a concern is O-line depth? Let's start with the first part here.
Sure.
Kind of run through what we saw last week. Bedford had been practicing all the way through Tuesday. We saw him on Tuesday going into practice. Looked like he was fine. Wednesday, didn't see him at all. Off day on Thursday. Friday, he comes back. It's kind of a walk-through practice, and he's got a crutch, and he's walking with a knee brace. We're all kind of like, that's not good. Yeah, it's a little concerning. This is a guy that we obviously think will play a big role and is projected to start at right guard. Dan was pretty forthcoming, I thought, on Saturday, considering how he's been on other Saturdays this year.
Oh, yeah.
And just said, hey, he's down for a little bit. He'll definitely, we think he's going to play games this year. He's confident of that. So you're kind of left with a situation here where my interpretation, I think yours as well, Matt, is Bedford's not going to be there game one. I don't know if he'll be there game 2, 3, 4. I think I kind of heard maybe sometime in October is when this could come together. We heard the same thing last year, remember, with Justin Jacobs, and he didn't come and play till later. So there's an optimism he'll be available for the stretch run, but not for the start. So to that question there, who do you see replacing Bedford, Matt? Kind of where's your head out there? And I'm sure we'll probably agree because it's kind of the same list of names.
I think the first question becomes, is Iapani Lalu, or AKA Poncho, does him moving from center to guard give you your best 5 players? And if that is the answer, then it becomes a wide range of options that happen. Because remember, Poncho played most of his reps at left guard. I think it was like 180 snaps last season, but it was like 116 or just over 100 last year at right guard. So he's played both positions. That becomes the question. Are we, as the coaching staff, sitting down saying, are we better with Poncho at right guard and Charlie Pickard or Bryce Bolton playing at center? Or do we take too big of a drop off by moving Poncho to guard and elevating a backup center into the position? Marcus Harper is your most experienced lineman. It also could be a case of like, should we move Marcus to center and Poncho to right guard or left guard, and then you elevate a Nishad Strother or you elevate a Janoris Wilson to the other guard position? Maybe that's your 5 best offensive linemen without Bedford. I have a feeling they're going to stick with Poncho at center.
I do too.
I think that's going to be the move that they're going to first decide is let's just keep him there. If he was going to be the best center with Bedford, he should be the best center without Bedford. Then it turns into, okay, what's next? It's probably going to be looked at first of Nishad Strother, Eastern Carolina transfer from last season. This is the reason why they brought him in last year. He was supposed to be a potential starter, a guy that was going to push Stephen Jones maybe to potentially take his job. And obviously that didn't happen. He got hurt himself last year. We should note that. He played in 5 games for Oregon last season in limited snaps, but he was a highly productive player at East Carolina. I think that's going to be the first move. And the one that could maybe complicate things is I think you asked the question about Dave Iuli. I can't remember what exactly Dan Lanning said, other than he's getting closer. But if he can get himself ready in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, that maybe becomes a different topic as well.
Yeah, those are the cast of characters. I think the most straightforward path is the one that I think Matt and I both think will happen, which is Poncho stays at center and you just move Strother into that right guard spot. Again, he had a chance, we thought, last year to start. He was hurt probably right around now in fall camp. Ended up not being available for a while, ended up playing very limited snaps. He's still around. This is a guy who has a couple of years of starting experience at East Carolina. You can do worse, frankly, than a guy who's at least started at a Division I FBS program before. So I think that's the most logical spot. I'm with Matt, though, that there seems to be, based upon what Alik Terry has said and what we've seen in practice, some sort of, I don't know if it's hesitation or a desire to make sure the right fit at center is Poncho.
Yeah.
We've watched practice, and like one day Poncho will be working on snaps, the first group that we see out there. And again, it's not first teams, but they're doing these combo blocking drills, and they're the center, right guard, left guard together, snapping against defensive linemen. And one day it'll be Poncho, the next day it'll be Charlie Pickard. And it seems like if I were to pick between two guys to play center, it would be those two guys. And we've done the Charlie Pickard story before, but I think you could find a lot less qualified walk-ons than Charlie Pickard. He had offers from a bunch of FBS and FCS programs. He's an in-state kid from up in Portland. He chose to go to Oregon.
He played in 13 games for Oregon last season.
He was kind of their backup center at times for parts of last year. I know Poncho got the nod in the bowl game, but this is a guy I think they have some faith with and some confidence. And so I think there's a possibility that plays out. And then you just put Poncho at right guard where he's been working. But my best guess is what we said before, which is keep Harper at left guard, Poncho's at center, move Strother up a line to play right guard. And Iuli does add kind of an interesting element to this of maybe you get to a point where he's available and he can push Strother to start at right guard or whatnot. I think he's been primarily playing left guard. Not that necessarily matters a ton, but it's worth noting. So that's kind of where everything is at. I don't know if there's another logical one. What's that?
What if we've not really discussed this anywhere, to my knowledge? What if we're overlooking Charlie Pickard at guard and not at center?
I haven't seen him really rep anywhere else, but that could be a case. Maybe he should be included in that conversation. I'm trying to remember back now to what Terry said on Wednesday when he ran through the right guard candidates. To my recollection, I don't think Charlie was mentioned there. Is my recollection, but I could be wrong. That's an interesting possibility. I think Pickard is going. Dan even said it. You asked about it. I think Pickard's going to have a role, whether that be a backup or somebody who actually plays significant snaps this year. I think this is a name to at least be kind of on your radar. I know it's a walk-on. Fans get frustrated when the highly regarded guys don't play and the walk-ons do, but this is a guy who's been kind of waiting and biding his time in the background. And I think he could play some this year. I don't expect he's their starting day one center. No. I don't expect he's their starting day one guard, but this could be someone who fills in if there is need later on. And I guess that kind of brings you to the second part of the question of how concerned we are with the O-line depth. First thing I will say is I have a lot of confidence in Alik Terry.
Yeah. Last
year, they were kind of seen as the weak link. We were having questions about, okay, how is this going to come together? Is this going to look the way it's supposed to? And it was pretty seamless. Like they were a Joe Moore Award semifinalist. That's the best offensive line group in the country. They were one of the final 2 or 3 schools that were looked at for that. Allowed 5 sacks all season. There's still these great bookends at offensive tackle. Like I think the offensive line is going to be fine. I do think it's reasonable to be somewhat concerned on the depth at some of these. The fact that we're talking about players who haven't really played a whole lot. Like Iuli's been around, but he hasn't played a lot. And that sounds like it's a possibility. Or a Pickard who's a walk-on who, again, I think is a pretty capable player. Like I think that sort of speaks to the situation we're at here. But I think at the end of the day, I'm pretty confident this is going to be okay and not a just complete disaster. And the other reality is, like, I think as long as they can get this stuff shored up by Ohio State and by Michigan and Wisconsin, those are the teams that have really strong interior defensive lines, especially Ohio State and Michigan. I think they're going to be okay. I don't think you're going to lose games because of this. So I don't know, on a scale, somebody asked us to put on a scale of 1 to 10. They said 9.5. I think that's pretty high. I'd probably say like 6.5 level of concern. Like, it's on my radar. I don't feel great about it. I wish Alik Terry was going to come out and say, we think we know exactly who we've got. We're not ready to announce it. We want to keep the competition ongoing, but we've got a really great feel of who our best 5 are. I wish that was what he said on Wednesday, and maybe that's what they felt, but he didn't want to convey it quite that way. But I do think it's worth having a little bit of concern, but my level isn't off the charts yet.
Go back to week 1 of the 2023 football season. Your starting lineup was Connerly, Harper, JPJ, Stephen Jones, and Johnny Cornelius. We did not know at all Poncho's skill set yet. Like, no one had come out and said Poncho was going to be a guy that would play in every single game. We didn't know any of that. Your biggest name off the bench was Dave Iuli, who redshirted the year before and played in 4 or 5 games. And then you had Junior Angelau, who was a portal addition that was coming off a major injury, and there was, durability. How close is he going to be prior to his injury? And then Nishad Strother, who was hurt going into week 1, which we knew. Mm-hmm. They didn't have this like stockpile of offensive linemen behind their starting 5 that you looked at and said, oh yeah, this dude's a stud. Even if he, the guy above him gets hurt, he's going to slide right in totally fine. You go to this year and it's the same deal. Yeah. The only issue is one of your 5 guys that you thought was going to be a starter has gotten hurt, and nothing has changed. So I think, is it bad news? Absolutely. Is it news to be concerned about? Absolutely. Is it news to be sitting here saying the season is over? No, not at all. They get Idaho. They should be able to work through some kinks. Boise will push them a little bit, but the reality is your starting right guard not playing against Boise should not be the reason you lose to a team of Boise State's caliber in week 2 of the year. And if that's the reason, like, you've got bigger issues at hand. And then week 3, you go to Oregon State, and Oregon should blast them. They're nowhere near the same level of talent they were a year before when Oregon killed them anyways. And then you get a bye week, and then you go and play a UCLA team that's rebuilding. And then you get a Michigan State team that's rebuilding. So your first 5 games, your first 6 games of the season, like, you hope that this Bedford injury isn't a 2-month period injury or a 3-month period injury. You hope it's a month type deal or a 6-week type deal, because they still have 2 weeks before the season starts. And that will allow you time to develop the guys that have to play now and to allow Bedford time to rehab and get himself ready for the stretch run. But it shouldn't be a 5-alarm fire and every firehouse in the station, rushing down to Autzen Stadium. They should be fine. The goals should still be the same. The expectations should still be the same. Now, if another injury happens to another position group along the offensive line, if a tackle goes down or if another guard goes down, then yeah, now it's real. It's real to get a little worried, because you've already tapped into some of the depth, and now you're gonna have to do it again. And that's where you can sustain basically any team out there that's going to compete for a college championship has the talent to withstand an injury at a position. And it's when the second one comes. And now, the unfortunate thing for Oregon is they haven't played any games yet, and they've already got an injury at this spot.
Yeah. And if this was a season ending, we would be having a very different conversation.
100%.
The reality is Oregon is able to lose a couple of games this year. And even again, I don't think it's going to be what determines an outcome against Ohio State necessarily. But let's say you come out of that going, man, if Bedford had played, Oregon would have had a great chance of winning that game.
Yep.
The season's not lost. This isn't the old format. You could still see Oregon get hot, win every game down the final, back half of the conference schedule, play in the Big Ten championship game and be in the playoffs. So I don't think this is a very deep, talented team. I don't think the season is lost quite yet. Let's get to like a couple of weeks before we decide that, maybe.
Sure.
All right. Second question from @DuckLoyalist503. With the success of Justin Herbert in the NFL, now the success Bo Nix is showing in the preseason, do you think top-tier quarterbacks will now look at Oregon more as a school that can develop NFL-ready quarterbacks? Autzen Audibles. I wanted to do two things here. I wanted to talk about Bo a little bit because he's having a really, really nice start to his professional career. And then I wanted to tackle the other part second. I don't know, Matt, did you get a chance? Have you watched a little bit of Bo in the preseason so far?
I saw some of the highlights, the mashups of like his drive, 80 yards, a touchdown. What did he go, 8 for 9? Seems to be making the right reads, seems to be generating a bunch of buzz. I saw a tweet saying like Sean Payton will name Bo Nix the starter week 1 here in a couple days, if at most, and everyone knows it, and he's the guy. Like, and are we really surprised? Like,
no,
shouldn't be.
No, and like, okay, a couple things. He's 23, I think, of 30 passing in 2 preseason games, and the drives he's led, 6 of 7 have gone for points, and the one that didn't was a play where he threw the ball for a touchdown, but his foot was just past the line of scrimmage, so it was an illegal pass, and that ended that drive. So like, he's a couple of inches, maybe 6 or 7 inches from 7 of 7 with 3 touchdown passes and like, again, 7 incompletions. So he's doing a really great job. And I'm not surprised because Bo should be a guy who's ready right away. I mean, he's 24 years old. He's played a ton of college football. He's been, I think, a very capable player in the college football level. And now you move into the NFL, into an offense I think is very friendly to his skill set, where it's, let's just spread the wealth. Let's get the ball out quick. Let's make quick decisions. Those are the things that he excelled at Oregon. And we'll see what it looks like in the regular season. But I think you have to be really thrilled. I spent like 10 minutes last night listening to a Denver Broncos podcast talking about it. And they're like giddy over there. I mean, they've had such bad quarterback.
They should be.
That's such bad quarterback kind of luck and outcomes the last, basically since Peyton Manning has been there. They think they've got something here, and I don't blame them. I thought this is what Oregon fans were feeling a couple of years ago, not after the Georgia game, but once they got maybe 3 or 4 games into the season. So I'm excited for Bo. He's a great guy. It was fun covering him. Looks like he's going to be, I think, very much has an opportunity to be successful. I do think he'll be the day 1 starter in Denver, which is what I think everybody expected when they used a first-round pick and traded up for him. To the second part, I kind of already think this is the case. Do you think top-tier quarterbacks will? Because, like, they just signed Dante Moore and Dillon Gabriel as portal additions, and those are, like, 2 of the 4 or 5 most attractive portal players out there. Like, these are the top guys. Like, Dante Moore was a player they would have signed a couple of years ago, if not for Kenny Dillingham leaving and kind of the uncertainty there. Dante's talked about that. He was a commit to Oregon. Like, Oregon's been not maybe Ohio State or Alabama level in terms of attracting quarterback talent, or LSU maybe, but I think they've always been really, really good. And so, this doesn't hurt. That's for sure. Like, this is a program that has had a lot of success at this position. Of course, different staffs. I hope it's not too loud. I think the garbage guy is showing up here, so that might be an inconvenience for a moment here. Apologies of morning podcasting here on the day that the garbage is picked up. But no, I think they already are. And if and maybe this helps a little bit, but you just look at what Oregon's been able to do through the portal and what they've been able to do, even prep recruiting. I know like Luke Moga wasn't a 5-star all everything recruit, but Austin Novosad, big time recruit, Keely Smith Jr., a lot of guys in the West Coast think is one of the better guys. Like, I think you feel really good about where Oregon is right now in terms of attracting quarterback talent.
I mean, let's go back to just like 2000. AJ Feely, Joey Harrington were battling it out. Feely got the job for a while, and then Harrington eventually took over. Feely still got drafted. Joey then followed up right after that, getting drafted. And then they went to a combo, Fife and Clemens eventually year 1 won the job. He ended up getting drafted. His replacement, Dennis Dixon, ends up getting drafted. Marcus Mariota, after a little bit of time with Roper and some Costa talk, but Mariota shows up. Obviously, he gets drafted, and then the Prukop and Vernon Adams experiments, and then Herbert, the true, high school guy that's goes into a year as a starter. He gets drafted. His replacement, Anthony Brown, he gets the job. He's not drafted, but he makes an NFL roster. And then obviously Bo Nix now getting drafted. I think this is a school that has a known reputation of developing quarterbacks. Doesn't matter the system, doesn't matter the offensive coordinator, doesn't matter the head coach. They're producing guys. Now, is it going to get better? Yes. The fact that Herbert's doing what he's doing and Bo Nix, it's preseason. Green Bay was playing their second string guys. Denver was playing their first. You should note that. That's notable. Nonetheless, like if Bo Nix comes out and performs well, and I think the Broncos are supposed to be like one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the NFL this coming season. And if they somehow climb out of that bottom 5 and they're in the discussion for like, hey, everything needs to go right for them, but they could still get the wild card in the month of December. Like that's a huge win for this program. And Bo Nix would probably be a big reason for that. And so, it's only going to get stronger. Obviously they've got Akili Smith committed this year's group. They've got Jonas Williams committed in the 2026 group. Eric brought up the fact that Dante Moore is here, so they're starting to attract 5-star talent. They're starting, Austin Novosad and Luke Moga are 2 guys that would 5-10 years ago would be viewed as kind of the heir apparent young stud in the quarterback room. And the guy that everyone is, falling over from a fan base perspective. And they're kind of unfairly an afterthought within the fan base now. I mean, that should be a sign that a mid 4-star, low 4-star caliber guy isn't even being talked about, isn't even being viewed as a threat for the job within the fan base. And I don't think that. I don't think Eric thinks that. The Dante Moore still got to win the job, but the majority of the fan base just doesn't look at those 2 guys. And that's how far the program has come, where 4-stars are just being viewed as everyday players now. So to answer your question, and I agree with Eric, like it's already been that way. It's only going to get stronger too.
Yeah, and I guess if the thought process is let's be getting a 5-star every year, I understand that in terms of Oregon is able to recruit at a really high level. I also know stacking 5-star quarterback prospects at the same school in consecutive classes is actually pretty rare right now, for the reason that we all know, which is that there's only going to be one quarterback. And if you could pick between a school, and of course kids, a lot of these guys are open to competition, but for some of them, if they're like, okay, if I'm picking between school A and B and everything's equal, and one has a 5-star who just signed last year and the other doesn't,
yep,
there's a sense of like, okay, like do you expect Nebraska to go get another Dylan Raiola after getting the number 1 recruit last year at the quarterback position? I don't. So I just think that's another part to expect here. But I do think Oregon's quarterback recruiting is already strong. And as to Matt's point, just like we think everything else is on the upswing in recruiting, I think quarterback will also follow that suit here. Okay, third one from @ITPCFB. If Dillon Gabriel goes down early in the season, how much confidence do you have in the Ducks still making the college football playoff? Not a ton, probably, if I'm just being honest. I think you could still see Oregon win 8 or 9 games pretty easily, because the schedule kind of falls off a cliff once you look past Ohio State, Michigan, and yeah, and then I'd throw Wisconsin on the road as just another kind of like tough one. But after that, like, it's I think the FPI had Washington as the 3rd hardest game on the schedule, and they predict them to win 6.5 games this year. Like, it just sort of speaks to the difference in terms of the top teams they play in the bottom. So, like, I think Oregon could still win a lot of games. I think they would have a really hard time beating either Michigan or Ohio State. I don't think those games would be games that they would win, and I think they would probably have a hard time on the road in November against Wisconsin without a veteran quarterback. Like, I'm really high on what Dante Moore will be, yes, and less confident of what he is right now, because a year ago we saw him and it wasn't fantastic. Now, circumstances have certainly changed for Dante Moore. And again, this kind of goes back to the conversation we're having. I'm just assuming he's the guy. Maybe that's not the right assumption. Maybe Autzen Audibles would get the look. But if we are to assume correctly or incorrectly that it's Dante who would be the replacement, circumstances are better at Oregon, much better skill talent, schematically probably more favorable in terms of just what you ask a quarterback to do than what UCLA had. I still just would be really wary of like thinking they could get to 10-2, 9-3. You have to be 9-3 with like a really impressive resume, by the way. And if you aren't beating Michigan or Ohio State, your best win is what? Like I said, it's like, is it Boise State? Would it be Wisconsin or Washington? Are those teams even good enough? So I think it would be really challenging because I just think you would, to me at least, I would just take off the possibility of beating either of those powerhouse preseason top 10 teams. And if they don't win either of those games, I think the path is difficult because I don't know if the schedule has enough meat on it.
I think if you can get to 10-2, you've got a puncher's chance of sneaking in as like a 10 seed or an 11 seed. It would come down to looking really, really good against Washington, looking really, really good against Wisconsin, looking good against, I think Maryland is the last one of the last games.
They play them
home game.
They play them in November. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the games that you'd have to come out and just kind of just guns blazing, put up a bunch of points, build a lot of confidence. But you're right in the fact that the schedule just drops off. And that's to my point of like, you got to look good in the games that you don't have, or that you have outside of Michigan and Ohio State. If you could, I think a 10-2 Dante Moore team that blows out Washington at home to end the year, and blows out like they win by 2 scores or more. Wisconsin, they win by 2 scores or more, convincing victories. I think you could sneak in. If it's a 10-2 team and you look like Florida State did in the ACC championship, or you look like what Oregon played in 2000 and I think it was 7 when Dixon went down
7.
And it was like Cody Kemp and Roper, and it was just a shuffle of names at quarterback, and you were winning football games because you were pulling off trick plays and your offense was averaging like 285 yards. It was disgusting to watch football. You're not getting into the college football playoff, even if you go 10-2, as we saw with Florida State last year. So like, I would put it at like, let's for argument's sake, Gabriel gets hurt against Ohio State and they lose that game. I would probably argue they're going to lose at Michigan. They can probably get by early in the rest of October with some sluggy, ugly games, leaning on your defense. But if they emerge 10-2 and they beat Washington and the offense looks good, and they beat Wisconsin earlier and the offense looks good, like I still think they'll get in. Unless like Ohio State and Michigan both also have multiple losses. And, those losses to those two teams just don't look nearly as good from a resume perspective.
And just the last thing I'll say is it's harder than ever to know exactly how this will play out because it's the first time we've done this thing before with the 12-team playoff. And frankly, we also don't know what the rest of the country looks like. So like hypothetically, if Oregon has 2 losses and it's to Ohio State and Michigan and they win every other game, and even if it doesn't look great, well, if the rest of the country and the teams are competing for those last at-large bids are all 3 and 4 loss teams, then yeah, I think Oregon gets in pretty clearly because everybody looks at the roster and goes, that's a super talented team. At least they kind of settled in with the backup quarterback. But to my point earlier, like if there's a bunch of other teams that are 10-2 and Oregon's competing with those teams without its top quarterback and having maybe not looked great down the stretch of the season, then you're maybe having a different conversation. So let's just hope this doesn't happen.
Yeah, let's just put some bad juju out in this.
I mean, like we just started the podcast talking about a guy getting injured, and then we're spending time talking about if the quarterback who's a Heisman Trophy favorite is not playing. So I really want to watch Dillon Gabriel play a full season. I want to see Oregon win another Heisman Trophy. So let's go with that route as opposed to him getting hurt sometime in September or October.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll finish up the mailbag. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 3 questions in, 2 more to go.
Yeah, this one from @SnyderJordan. What are some bold predictions that you have for players or the team for this season? Jordan, you probably didn't see this, but in June, I put together 5 bold predictions, and I'm just going to run through these. I don't think we ever talked about this on the podcast, so that is an oversight on our part here. I have a fun time doing my Scopeldamus column. For those who aren't VIP members, you can only read it if you are. So maybe it's an incentive to sign up, or maybe it's not. But here's the 5 I selected back in, again, late June. I went with the Ducks win the Big Ten in their first season in the conference. Sort of self-explanatory. Other listeners probably know I've predicted Oregon will go 12-0. So a little bit of math. They don't lose any games. They probably win the conference. That seems kind of the lineup. I had Oregon leads the Big Ten in touchdowns scored. It's an offensive prediction. Oregon's offense last year was, I think, second in touchdowns scored and second in points per game scored. So this is an offense that looked great last year. We've talked about it all offseason. They have to replace a lot. I think they've done a great job of doing that through the transfer portal. And I think they're set up to be another really explosive offense. I don't know if it'll be quite the same number of touchdowns and offensive scoring will be quite, maybe it'll go down a little bit because the Big Ten has tougher defenses, I guess I'd say across the board. But I do think I think there's a great chance that they are the most prolific and explosive offense in this conference. The third one I had, Oregon is a top 10 defense nationally, which would be maybe not the most bold because they were kind of right in that range a year ago. But I think this year's defense has a lot of question marks. And I think there's a great chance that they are one of the top units nationally. And I think you can make a case this has a great chance to be the best unit under Dan Lanning. And then my 2 boldest ones were Dillon Gabriel becomes the second Duck player to win the Heisman Trophy. And by the way, this was mid-June. This is June before he was the Heisman favorite. He was like, let's see, I can actually click on the article. I think I wrote what his odds were. He was, let's see, he's already in the discussion. Yeah, he was 3rd at the time behind Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers. Beck had plus 750 odds, Ewers plus 900, Gabriel at plus 1,000. So I think that one remains a pretty decent. There's like good odds that could be an outcome this year, especially if he's not hurt early. And if the team takes care of business. And then the last one I had was Jeff Bossa becomes the first Oregon player under Dan Lanning to have 100 tackles.
Ooh,
which I thought was kind of a spicy one because I had the stats here, Matt. Like, do you know how they haven't even been close from
a tackles perspective?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because mine one I came up with a couple, and a couple of mine were tackles, and I had looked at this. The last time someone went over 100 was Sewell in 2021, and I don't think he came off the field ever. But under Dan, but he didn't play for Dan Lanning, and
he did play for Dan, but he didn't do it
that season. He didn't play for Dan. Correct. In 2000, I have them actually right here in front of me. In 2022, Bennett Williams led the team with 74 tackles, which is not a lot. Like from a key starter, high tackle total, and then last year it was Evan Williams with 82. So like a linebacker actually hasn't led the team in tackles in the Lanning era yet. Mm-hmm. So you feel like that? Obviously, you feel like that's going to happen.
I'm a big Bossa believer. I think, and longtime listeners will know I was looking at those PFF grades a couple of years ago. I was like, this guy, is he that good? I think he's turned a corner. I thought he really improved last year, and I just keep hearing so many positive things about him that I think there's a great chance. Well, there's a great chance a non-Williams brother leads the team in tackles for the first time under Dan Lanning, and I think a pretty good chance that player is Jeff Bossa. And I'll go with 100 tackles, which is maybe not the craziest. If you think Oregon is going to make a long run in the CFP and play like 15 or 16 games, that becomes a lot easier. But I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity there, especially with the kind of offenses they're playing for a linebacker to be more impactful. Part of the reason I think safeties were leading the team in tackles was because of the offenses they played in the Pac-12 where, I won't say it was a 60-40 pass run split because that would be inaccurate, but it wasn't too far off that in terms of like these were high-powered pass offenses, not as much high-powered run offenses. What did you come to?
Okay, I have 4.
Okay.
Some of them are most of them are stat based, and then one of them's end of the year thing.
Okay.
My first one: 3 running backs go for 700 or more yards. Or I'll give myself an out here. 3 Ducks go for 700 or more yards rushing on the ground this season. That hasn't happened in a long time. I think 2013 is the last time it happened. And you go back, and that's a year where Byron Marshall ran for 1,000, Mariota went for 750, and Thomas Tyner went for 711. DeAnthony Thomas was really close, 106 yards away. He was at 594. So they almost had 4 guys do it. But I think they have 3 guys on this year's team go for 700 or more yards. I also am going to bank on the fact that we saw a bunch of stuff fall from a records perspective, from last time win perspective at receiver last year with Troy and Tez together. I think that's going to happen again. 2 receivers go over 1,000 yards for the second year in a row.
I like that.
And then I also have, here's the tackle one. I have 2 Ducks finishing with 80 or more tackles this season. Now, I am a firm believer, and maybe these aren't super bold because of this reason. I'm giving you the out here. I'm a firm believer Oregon's going to play 14, 15, 16 games this season. And so that kind of factors into some of these predictions. I think a Jay Harris or a Jaden Lamar, might be a case where for 3 games they are the second back because Jordan James or Noah Whittington aren't ready yet from a winning perspective, or maybe they're dealing with some kind of minor injury and they just can't play, or maybe simply put, like, hey, the durability of guys in December isn't where it was in September because they've played so many games, and so they rotate a little bit more. Or the fact that I think they're going to play in a bunch of games and 2 receivers going over. I'll change it to 1,100 yards, not 1,000. Make it a little harder.
Yeah, make it hard on yourself, please.
And then the last one, we won't know this one until, when is it? April, when the NFL draft is. But I think 5 or more guys go in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft.
Wow.
Johnny and Josh, the 2 offensive linemen, are kind of guys you look at and say most likely to get picked early. I think Tez could get in there. I think Jordan Birch could get in there. If Evan Stewart has a huge year, he could get in there. I think if Terrence Ferguson has a big season, he could get in there. We could maybe potentially see like a Jabbar Muhammad play really, really well and push his way. He's not a day 2 projection right now, but he could maybe get into that discussion. So I'm gonna go out there and say 5 guys get picked in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft for Oregon. I think they're gonna have a huge year, and I think that huge year is gonna lead to a bunch of statistics going down, some big years individually, some team awards, some player awards, and then obviously the NFL draft, showing, oh yeah, they were really good because they have blank number of NFL dudes on the team now.
Can I pick your brain on the individuals? I know you're keeping it broad, but like for running backs, for rushing, I should say, I assume taking off the running back only thing, you think Gabriel could be in that mix?
Yes. I think we see a little bit more
2022
willingness to run the football with the quarterback this season, just because of the depth that they have with Dante Moore, Austin Novosad, and Luke Moga. Last year it was basically a redshirting freshman, and if he got hurt, Ty Thompson was there, but we'd seen Ty Thompson play.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I'm banking on the fact that Dillon Gabriel gets involved here. But to be honest, like if they play 13 games in the regular season because of the Big Ten championship game, and then like let's just say they lose it and they have to play an opening round game, they win that, they play another one, like you're at 15 games. It's not going to take much to get to 700 yards when you're at 15. It's 47 yards a game average, and all it's going to take is Noah Whittington not playing, I think, the first 2 or 3 games because they want to be safe with him, and maybe Jay Harris or Jaden Lamar in those games get 300 yards collectively.
Or couldn't I think you could just say Jordan and Noah could get to 700, and so could Dillon.
Yes,
right. That's like the most direct path in my mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very real possible.
Okay, and then what about, you said, I'm assuming Tez and Evan are your 1,100 yard receivers?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought maybe going 3 at 800.
It's a lot of yards.
It's a lot, and that one's really dependent on, is Oregon going to be in the game long enough to have so many guys catch passes, and you're really dependent upon a good quarterback getting you the football. Like you look at, I'm just looking at the stats here. Like last time Oregon's had like 3 guys go over 500 yards in a season. Like I am in 2018 right now, and I haven't seen it. 2016, it just doesn't happen all that often. 2015, they almost did it, and it goes back to 2014, and that's a year where they played 15 games. Byron Marshall went for 1,000. Darren Carrington had 700, and Devin Allen went for 684, and Dwayne Stanford went for 639.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember those games, like there were stretches where like Devin Allen didn't do anything for like 3 or 4 weeks, or Dwayne Stanford had like a 2 or a 3 week period where he put up monster numbers, and and then over the course of the rest of the year, it was 30 yards. So I'm banking on 2 guys doing 1,100 yards. I think Oregon's going to have a season in which Gabriel is going to be a Heisman contender, if not the favorite. And seeing how Junior Adams has been the last couple of years, rotating guys, seeing how they handled Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson last year, I think Evan's just going to slide right into that vacated Franklin spot. And the numbers for Gary Bryant, for Trayshawn Holden will go up, but the majority of the numbers will still stick with Evan and Tez.
And then last one, the tackles. Who do you like there? Who are your 2 guys over 80?
Bossa, I'm a big Bossa believer as well. So that's the obvious one. The second one, I'm not sure. I've thought about Taisheem. I've thought about Kobe Savage, because you look at the last 2 years, it's safeties that have led the team in tackles. Especially with the fact that they're moving into the Big Ten, and outside of Ohio State, pretty much everybody's run dominant in the Big Ten. But ultimately, I landed with Justin Jacobs. I think he's going to stay healthy. I think him and Bossa together are going to be really, really good. And then honestly, Eric, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. This is super bold, and that's why I didn't do it. But I almost did 3 guys with 80 or more, just because you take Savage, you put Justin, and you put Jeffrey. The teams that they're going to play, like Oregon State's going to run the football. We know that. Boise State's kind of balanced, but they've always been a team that runs the ball really well.
Elite running back.
Yes, elite running back. You look at Michigan, they're obviously going to run the football. Illinois will be a team that will run the football. Northwestern.
By the way, Ohio State is going to run the ball. They've got 2 awesome running backs, and their quarterback is more run. That's a bigger strength than his arm at this point.
Sure. Wisconsin is like a very heavy run dominant team. I just think all these teams that they're going to play, like Purdue's maybe not, like they like to throw the football around a little bit, but like I just look at these teams and go, like, it's set up for, realistically, like you might see 3 guys go over 80 tackles, especially if they play 15 games. Because it's like 5 tackles a game.
Yeah, the added game part makes some of this prediction stuff strange. I mean, that's the thing we have to kind of come to terms with here too, or some of these stat things might fall easier if Oregon actually does like make a run to the semifinals or plays for a national championship. Talking about, like you said, 15, 16 games. So that'll be one of the things to watch for. Okay, we got one more question here from a longtime listener and frequent question asker, Robbie Parness. The portal helps fill holes, but should we be concerned that places we are thinner at with vets, he mentions tight end, middle linebacker, and offensive line, are not usually ones in the portal that they're loaded with high caliber talent. I know we've gotten guys like a Johnny Cornelius, Justin Jacobs, etc., but every year it seems like there's only a few at those positions. Appreciate the question from Robbie. As I said, he's been one of our kind of OGs here on this pod for a while. So thank you so much, Robbie, for being a listener and for kind of participating. Here's what I'd say. I agree that there are, like, if you look at what tight end, linebacker, and offensive line are looking like after this year, it gets a little hairy. Look at tight end. You go, there's no Ferguson, there's no Herbert. That means Kenyon Sadiq and Roger Saliapaga are probably your two most notable returners. Middle linebacker, Bossa will be gone. I think there's a chance Justin Jacobs is gone. If that's the case, you're looking at Devin Jackson as your top returner. Jerry Mixon, maybe one of the guys who's currently a true freshman, like a Dillon Williams or a Braden Platt or a Kamar Mathuti. Offensive line, we've already kind of touched on that. A lot of guys will be gone. Both tackles are probably gone. Marcus Harper's definitely gone. Matthew Bedford would be gone. So I understand there should be concern maybe about like what this looks like long term. I just don't have a lot of concerns about Oregon in the portal.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Because I understand, and I don't disagree. Like, there are certain positions where it seems like there are surpluses of talent, and there's just a ton of them, and you can kind of go pick a guy. Quarterback seems to be one of those where a guy gets antsy. Like Malachi Nelson's a 5-star recruit. He ends up at Boise State. By the way, didn't win that job, which is kind of interesting. But that's like an example of like a former 5-star ends up at a non-Power 4 program. But I understand, like tight end, middle linebacker, offensive line, maybe there's a scarcity of talent there. I also go like, didn't we just go through a couple cycles in a row where Oregon just collected all the guys they wanted and did a heck of a job? Like Oregon went out and got 2 of the best defensive linemen. They went out and got arguably the top receiver. They went out and got some incredible cornerback talent. I just think even if there's a lack of talent there, I have a lot of confidence Oregon's going to be able to close and fill those holes. And maybe you're not looking at quite the same top tier talent as we've seen this year at those spots, but that they'll go out and grab some of the 2 or 3 best players at each of these positions. So that's where I'm at. I understand the concern because as I kind of ran through there, those positions are going to be kind of light next year in terms of what they bring back.
This is what I would say. It easily becomes a concern on August 19th when you look toward next season and
also a really good point, Matt. Yeah.
Just because like we haven't seen the development of a season or the development of half a year and what that could mean for the following year. Like, let's look at like the depth chart that was released going into the first game last season. Like, we didn't know along the offensive line what Poncho was like. Okay. We did not know that we thought Josh Connolly was going to be good, but last year at this time, we were not talking about Josh Connolly being a day 1 draft pick going into the 2025 NFL draft. Like, that's where we're at now because of a whole growth of one season, guys getting significantly better at positions. Okay. We did not know like Kenyon Sadiq. We knew he was athletic. We didn't know how it was going to fit though. But like, you look at Kenyon and from a talent and athleticism standpoint, he might be the best tight end of the entire room. And it's now just experience, especially because he's now 240 pounds, according to Drew Maringer.
Big news there. That was big. Yeah. And on the listed weight's 240. That's a big boy.
Yes. We didn't know like what Tez Johnson was going to be like last season. We thought he was going to be good. Did anyone really think he was going to break Oregon school records? Did anyone really think he was going to be this like 1,100-yard receiver? No, we were all thinking it was going to be other guys. Like that stuff didn't happen defensively. Like we didn't know how good Tatum Tuioti, Mateo Uyunglele, Blake Purchase. We certainly didn't expect Marion Winston to get the first start at edge.
Yeah.
In week 1 and become a guy that played in every game. We didn't think Amari Washington would be a guy that would play. And so, yes, you look at the depth chart right now and you project out to next season. And yeah, it does look a little hairy in certain positions, but maybe we see I'm just going to throw this name out there, Maybe Fox Crater, a true freshman offensive lineman that Alik Terry has just loved. Every time we've talked to him and his name comes up, he just says unbelievably positive things about Fox Crater. Maybe he pushes his way into the lineup like Poncho did last year. Maybe as much, but he plays as a true freshman. And now all of a sudden it's okay, yeah, they're losing Josh Connerly at left tackle, but Fox, he's shown enough where you feel at least some confidence going into week 1 next season. Maybe you lose Tez and you lose maybe you lose Evan Stewart to the draft early, and Gary Bryant doesn't use his extra year, and Trayshawn Holden's gone, but maybe this is the year that Justice Lowe shows up and it's like, holy smokes, like this guy got 40 passes for 600 yards. Like he's going to be a dude when he just gets his opportunity to be a full-time starter. Or an Ife Obadegwu at cornerback. Maybe he puts himself into a dime package and ends up having 3 interceptions over the course of the season, and the confidence is high that he's going to be a guy. So, like, yeah, I know that this is a long-winded answer. I know there's concerns. I know that, they'll be able to go out and they'll fill these positions from a portal perspective. I have no doubt about that, but also let's just see how this year plays out. And look, Oregon staff did not go heavy in the portal along defensive line this past offseason. And I think it's because they look at the depth chart and they said, we knew Amari Washington's going to be a guy. Like he played a bunch as a freshman when it was a loaded group. They have a bunch of confidence in a Mikael Gardner and a Terrence Green and an Ashton Porter. They brought in some guys as well, and Elijah Rushing and Aiden Breland and Xavier Sims and Jericho Johnson, Tion Gray. Like, there's probably going to be a point at some point where it's let's trust the evaluation that the staff did and the development the staff will have. And we're almost getting to that point where they'll still hit the portal hard, but filling the gaps become harder and harder because of the development they've got.
That's a good point, Matt. Yeah, it's easy to overlook that, and you're right. We haven't gotten into the season. There are tons of examples. And I mean, you brought up Poncho. It's 3 straight years where a true freshman has been a guy who's played over, I think, 150 snaps on the offensive line. It was Jackson Powers Johnson under Mario in his last year. It was Josh Connerly in 22, and then last year was Poncho. The odds will tell you whether it's a Crater or a Shaq McRoy or somebody, one of those guys will end up being somebody that you come out of the season going, hey, this guy can start. And that was the other thing. Those guys then became, in Jackson's case, a pseudo starter, but in both Josh and Poncho's case, we think starters the next year. So you're right. Some of these answers will take place during the season. There will be guys who will develop, and it's going to be, that's kind of the fun part of a season too, right? Like part of it is when you're a program like Oregon trying to win national championships and achieve big things. But the other part is kind of seeing how all these guys develop. And with as much talent as they have from a high school recruiting perspective on this roster, it only takes a couple of these guys hitting and having better seasons than we think, unproven players, I should say, to come out going like, well, maybe they don't have as bad of a situation at tight end or at offensive line or at linebacker. So, yeah, I think that's a good place to close.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for submitting the questions. Greatly appreciate that. The mailbag will be back on a regular basis moving forward because, believe it or not, Eric, this time next week, we are previewing Oregon, Idaho, and taking questions on that and other podcasts as well, previewing that game. It's here. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.